Marcus Webb wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag and looked at the engine he had just fixed. The quantum drive hummed smoothly now after 3 days of hard work. Everyone said it could not be repaired, but Marcus had proven them wrong again. He always did. That was his gift and his curse. The other mechanics on the Titan's Edge mining ship watched him from across the engine room. Tom Bradley crossed his arms and whispered something to Rick Hansen. Both men had worked on the same engine for weeks before giving up. Now Marcus had it running perfectly in just 3 days. Their faces showed anger more than respect. Marcus did not care about their jealousy anymore. He had dealt with it his whole life. Ever since he was a boy fixing broken toys and machines that adults threw away, he had been different. His hands seemed to understand how things worked even when his mind did not. He could feel what was wrong with an engine just by touching it. Other people called it luck, but Marcus knew it was something else. The ship's captain, Jake Morrison, walked into the engine room with a smile on his weathered face. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder and looked at the purring quantum drive with satisfaction. The captain had hired Marcus 2 years ago when no other ship would take him. Most crews did not like mechanics who made the others look bad. Outstanding work, as always, Marcus, Captain Morrison said. We'll reach Keth 7 tomorrow morning, and this baby will get us there smooth as silk. The company will pay us a nice bonus for bringing in this load of rare minerals on time. Marcus nodded and gathered his tools. He had worked 18 hours straight on the drive, and his body ached with exhaustion. All he wanted was a hot meal and his bunk. The other mechanics had already left the engine room without saying goodbye. They never did anymore. The mess hall was nearly empty when Marcus arrived. Most of the day's shift crew had already eaten and gone to their quarters. Only a few night shift workers sat at the metal tables eating their rations. Marcus got his food from the auto kitchen and sat alone at his usual table near the viewport. Through the thick glass, he could see the stars streaming past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. Rick Hansen walked over with a tray of food and sat down across from Marcus. This was unusual because Rick had not spoken to him in months, except when work required it. The tall mechanic with graying hair smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "Mind if I sit here, Marcus?" Rick asked, even though he was already sitting. "Wanted to apologize for being so cold lately. We're all on the same crew after all." Marcus looked up from his food with surprise. Rick had never apologized for anything before. The man had made Marcus's life difficult from the day he joined the crew. Rick believed he should be the chief mechanic instead of Marcus, despite having less skill with complex repairs. "Sure, Rick," Marcus said carefully. "No problem." Rick pushed a steaming cup across the table toward Marcus. "Brought you some of that coffee you like. The real stuff from Earth, not the synthetic garbage. Thought you might need it after working so hard on that drive." The coffee did smell good, and Marcus was tired enough that caffeine sounded perfect. He took a grateful sip and tasted the rich flavor of genuine Earth-grown beans. Rick must have used his personal stash, which made the gesture even more surprising. "Thanks," Marcus said between sips. "This is really good coffee." "Glad you like it." Rick replied with that same strange smile. "Drink up. You deserve it after the amazing work you did today." They sat in silence while Marcus finished his meal and coffee. Rick made small talk about the mining operation on Keth 7 and how much money they would all make from this successful run. Marcus found himself relaxing despite his usual wariness around Rick. Maybe the man really was trying to make peace between them. The coffee made Marcus feel warm and sleepy. His eyelids grew heavy as Rick continued talking about something Marcus could not quite follow anymore. The words seemed to come from very far away, even though Rick was sitting right across the table. Marcus tried to focus, but his vision began to blur around the edges. Feeling tired, Rick asked with concern that sounded fake now that Marcus was paying attention. "Maybe you should head to your bunk and get some rest." Marcus tried to stand, but his legs would not support his weight properly. He gripped the edge of the table as the mess hall spun around him. The few other crew members in the room were not looking in his direction. They seemed to be deliberately ignoring what was happening. "What did you put in the coffee?" Marcus asked through thick lips that did not want to work right. "Just something to help you sleep," Rick said, standing up and signaling to someone behind Marcus. "Don't worry. You won't feel anything after this." Strong hands grabbed Marcus under his arms as his vision went completely dark. The last thing he remembered was Rick's voice saying something about finally getting rid of the problem. Then everything went black and silent. Marcus woke up with the worst headache of his life and sand in his mouth. Bright sunlight burned through his closed eyelids, and the heat was already unbearable, even though it felt like early morning. He tried to move, but found his wrists and ankles tied tightly to metal stakes driven deep into the desert ground. The desert stretched in every direction as far as he could see. Red sand and scattered rocks under a pale sky with two suns climbing toward their deadly peak. This had to be Keth 7, but he was nowhere near the mining station. His crewmates had dumped him in the middle of the wasteland to die. Marcus tested the ropes around his wrists, but they were tied with expert knots that only got tighter when he pulled against them. The metal stakes were solid and driven so deep he could not budge them even with all his strength. Rick and the others had planned this carefully. The heat was already making him sweat, and both suns were still rising. Marcus knew about Keth 7 from the briefing files. During the day, the temperature reached levels that could kill a human in hours. At night, it dropped below freezing. The desert was empty of life, except for some strange crystal formations that looked like frozen lightning scattered across the wasteland. Marcus had maybe 6 hours before the heat became lethal. After that, he would cook slowly in the desert sun, while his former crewmates collected their mining bonus, and probably told Captain Morrison that Marcus had decided to stay on the planet. By the time anyone looked for him, there would be nothing left but bones. He closed his eyes and tried to think. There had to be a way out of this. Marcus had never met a machine he could not fix or a problem he could not solve. This was just another kind of problem. A deadly one, but still just a problem that needed a solution. The ropes were too tight and well tied to slip free. The stakes were buried too deep to pull out. But Marcus was a mechanic, and mechanics always found another way. He began working his hands back and forth, looking for any weakness in his bonds while his mind raced through possibilities. The twin suns climbed higher, and the heat grew more intense with each passing minute. Sweat ran down Marcus's face and soaked through his work clothes. He could already feel his body starting to dehydrate. Time was running out faster than he had hoped. In the distance, the crystal formations caught the sunlight and threw it back in strange patterns. They were beautiful in a deadly way like everything else on this planet. Marcus had read that scientists did not understand what they were made of or how they formed. The crystals seemed to bend light in ways that should not be possible. As the heat grew worse, Marcus began to see movement near the crystal formations. At first, he thought it was just heat mirages making the air shimmer, but the shapes seemed too organized to be random distortions. They moved with purpose like living things, but unlike any life forms Marcus had ever seen. The shapes were long and serpentine, but translucent like they were made of glass or energy. They flowed between the crystals in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Marcus blinked hard and shook his head, thinking the heat was already affecting his mind. But when he looked again, the shapes were still there and seemed to be coming closer. Marcus had heard stories about Keth 7 from other miners. Tales of ghost-like creatures that lived in the desert but never bothered anyone. Most people dismissed them as hallucinations caused by the extreme heat and isolation. Now Marcus wondered if those stories might be true after all. The sun was getting higher, and the heat was becoming dangerous. Marcus had to find a way free soon, or he would die tied to these stakes like his crewmates wanted. But first he needed to understand what those strange shapes moving through the crystal formations really were. Something told him they might be the key to his survival or his doom. The heat was getting worse, and Marcus could feel his skin burning even through his work clothes. The twin suns of Keth 7 climbed higher in the pale sky, and the desert around him shimmered with deadly waves of superheated air. His throat was already dry, and his body was losing water faster than he could replace it. Marcus kept watching the strange shapes moving between the crystal formations. They were definitely not heat mirages because they moved with too much purpose and intelligence. The translucent forms flowed like liquid mercury, but held shapes that reminded him of ancient dragons from Earth mythology. Long serpentine bodies with what looked like wings that flickered in and out of existence. One of the creatures drifted closer to where Marcus lay tied to the metal stakes. As it approached, he could see it more clearly, and what he saw made him question his sanity. The being was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Its body seemed to be made of starlight and shadow woven together into a form that his eyes could barely process. The creature was easily 20 feet long from nose to tail, with a graceful neck that curved like a swan's. What Marcus had thought were wings were actually flowing appendages that moved through the air like fins through water. The being's head was elongated and elegant, with large eyes that glowed with inner light. Those eyes seemed ancient and sad beyond measure. Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was too dry to make more than a croaking sound. The creature heard him anyway and turned its magnificent head in his direction. For a moment their eyes met, and Marcus felt something touch his mind. Not words exactly, but images and emotions that flooded through his consciousness like warm water. The touch was gentle but overwhelming. Marcus saw flashes of vast spaces between stars where beings like this one had once flown freely through dimensions that normal matter could not reach. He felt their joy in soaring through cosmic winds and dancing among nebulae like children playing in a garden. But underneath that joy was a crushing weight of loss and imprisonment that made Marcus's own trouble seem small. The creature pulled back from his mind, and Marcus gasped for air he did not realize he had been holding. The brief contact had shown him that these beings were real and not hallucinations brought on by heat and dehydration. They were as intelligent as humans, but far older and more powerful. Yet something was keeping them trapped on this dead world. More of the translucent dragons appeared from behind the crystal formations. They moved in a slow procession toward Marcus like a funeral march. Each one was slightly different in size and the way their bodies caught and reflected light. Some were more solid-looking, while others seemed barely there, all like ghosts of ghosts. As they came closer, Marcus could see that each creature wore something around its neck and limbs that looked like jewelry at first glance. But when his mechanics eye focused on the details, he realized they were shackles made of the same crystalline material as the formations scattered across the desert. The shackles glowed with the same inner light as the beings themselves, but the light was wrong somehow. Instead of the warm glow he had seen in their eyes, these restraints pulsed with cold fire that seemed to cause the creatures pain. The largest of the dragons approached Marcus directly. This one was more solid than the others, and its presence made the air around them hum with barely contained energy. The shackles around its neck and legs were thicker and more complex than those worn by its companions. Whatever these restraints were, they seemed designed to hold beings of immense power. The great dragon lowered its head until it was only inches from Marcus's face. He could feel waves of heat and cold radiating from its translucent form in patterns that made no sense according to normal physics. When it spoke, the words formed directly in his mind, without passing through his ears. "Human child, why do you suffer bound beneath the burning sky?" The voice was like music played on instruments that did not exist, beautiful and haunting with harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. He tried to answer, but could only manage a whisper through his parched throat. The dragon seemed to understand anyway, because it responded to thoughts Marcus had not even fully formed. "Your own kind have betrayed you, as ours were betrayed long ago. We understand the pain of abandonment by those who should have protected you." Marcus found his voice enough to croak out a question. "Were you?" Images flooded his mind again, but more controlled this time. The dragon was showing him its history deliberately, like pages in a book written with light and memory. Marcus saw a time when beings like this had traveled freely between dimensions and across the galaxy. They were called veiled drakes by those few species who encountered them, and they were revered as near-mythical creatures of wisdom and power. The veiled drakes existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions that allowed them to phase through solid matter and travel faster than light without ships. They fed on cosmic radiation and solar winds, drawing energy directly from stars and nebulae. To them, the universe was an endless ocean to explore, and they had swum through it for millions of years. But another species had envied their freedom. An ancient race called the Builders had developed technology that could manipulate quantum fields and dimensional barriers. They had trapped the veiled drakes using crystalline anchors that forced them to remain locked in normal space, where they slowly starved, cut off from the quantum energies they needed to survive. "We have been prisoners on this world for 3,000 of your years," the great dragon continued. "Each day we grow weaker as the anchors drain our essence and bind us more tightly to this single dimension. Soon we will fade completely and our species will be extinct. Marcus felt tears running down his cheeks, though he could not spare the moisture. The tragedy of these magnificent beings trapped and dying slowly on a dead world was almost too much to bear. But his mechanic's mind was already working on the problem, even as his heart broke for their suffering. The shackles, Marcus whispered. They're connected to the crystal formations, aren't they? The dragon's eyes brightened with something that might have been hope. You see, truly human child. The quantum metal chains are linked to anchor points throughout this region. The builders created a prison from which we cannot escape using our natural abilities. Marcus looked around at the crystal formations with new understanding. They were not natural geological features, but artificial constructs designed to create a dimensional cage. The shackles on each dragon were quantum entangled with specific crystals, creating an unbreakable web of containment. It was actually quite elegant from an engineering perspective, which made it even more cruel. But you understand machines, do you not? The dragon asked, reading his thoughts. We have watched many humans come and go over the centuries, but none have possessed your particular combination of knowledge and intuition. Marcus nodded weakly. Even dying of heat and thirst in the desert, his mind kept analyzing the problem. The quantum metal shackles were sophisticated technology, but still just machines when you got down to it. All machines had weaknesses and failure points, if you knew where to look. I might be able to help, Marcus said through cracked lips. But I need water, and I need to get closer to examine the anchor points. The great dragon turned to its companions, and they seemed to communicate without words or thoughts that Marcus could detect. After a moment, the dragon turned back to him with what might have been a smile, if dragons could smile. We cannot free you from your bonds without solid forms, but we can share some of our remaining life energy to sustain you. The risk is great for us as we have little to spare, but perhaps together we can find a solution that benefits us both. Before Marcus could ask what the dragon meant, he felt a warm, tingling sensation spread through his body. The crushing heat of the desert sun became bearable, and his thirst lessened, though it did not disappear entirely. Strength flowed back into his muscles, and his mind cleared the fog that had been building from dehydration. The dragon had grown noticeably dimmer and more translucent after sharing its energy. The sacrifice it had made to keep Marcus alive was enormous and might have shortened its already limited lifespan considerably. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. Why, Marcus asked. Why risk yourself for a stranger? Because you are the first being in 3 millennia to look upon us with understanding rather than fear, the dragon replied. And because your people have a gift for solving impossible problems through stubborn determination rather than elegant theory. Perhaps that is what we need to break free from elegant chains. Other veiled drakes began to gather around Marcus and the great dragon. Some were so faded they were barely visible, while others still retained enough substance to cast shadows on the sand. All of them were the glowing shackles that bound them to this dimension and slowly drained away their life force. Marcus studied the nearest crystal formation with his mechanics, looking for weak points and design flaws. The quantum metal chains that connected the shackles to the anchor points hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. But underneath that alien harmony, he could hear something familiar, the same kind of resonance patterns he had learned to recognize in quantum drive engines. I think I understand how this works, Marcus said as his mind began to see the connections between components. It's like a quantum drive, but in reverse. Instead of using dimensional fields to move through space, you're using them to lock space around specific points. The great dragon's eyes blazed brighter. Yes, human child. Can you find a weakness in such a system? Marcus smiled despite his desperate situation. Every system has weaknesses. The more complex and elegant it is, the more ways it can break down. Your builders were very clever, but they were thinking like engineers, not like mechanics. Give me time, and I'll find a way to jam their beautiful machine. Marcus felt the dragon's shared energy flowing through his body like liquid fire. The heat from the twin suns was still dangerous, but no longer immediately deadly. His mind was clear and focused despite being tied helplessly in the desert sand. The great dragon had bought him time, but at a terrible cost to itself. The translucent being was noticeably dimmer now and moved more slowly than before. Its companions gathered closer, as if trying to share their own dwindling strength. Marcus realized that every moment he delayed meant these magnificent creatures were dying a little more. The pressure to find a solution quickly was enormous. "Tell me more about the builders," Marcus said as he studied the nearest crystal formation. "How did they manage to trap beings who could move between dimensions?" The great dragon's mental voice carried waves of ancient pain and frustration. They were a species obsessed with order and control. Where we saw the universe as an endless ocean to explore, they saw chaos that needed to be contained and cataloged. Images flowed into Marcus's mind, showing him glimpses of the builders themselves. They were tall humanoid beings with crystalline skin that reflected light in prismatic patterns. Their cities were perfect geometric structures that seemed to grow from the ground like living crystals. Everything about their civilization was precise and mathematical, with no room for the organic chaos that most life forms embraced. The builders studied us for centuries before they acted. The dragon continued. They learned that our ability to phase between dimensions came from quantum fluctuations in our cellular structure. Our bodies exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional states, which allows us to move through barriers that would stop purely physical beings. Marcus nodded as he began to understand the science behind their imprisonment. So they created technology that would lock you into just one-dimensional state. That's why you can't phase through the shackles or the crystal anchors. Exactly, human child. The quantum metal chains create a dimensional anchor field that forces us to remain in your physical reality. We become trapped like fish pulled from water and left to suffocate in air. The dragon showed Marcus more memories of the day they were captured. Hundreds of veiled drakes had been exploring this region of space when the builder trap activated. Crystalline spires erupted from the planet's surface, while quantum metal nets fell from hidden ships in orbit. Within minutes, an entire pod of these ancient beings found themselves shackled and grounded on a world that offered them nothing but slow death. "How many of you were there originally?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. 237 souls were caught in the builder web. The dragon replied with profound sadness. Of those, only 19 remain. The others faded away as their life essence was slowly drained by the anchor field. Marcus felt sick thinking about the magnitude of this genocide. Over 200 intelligent beings had been murdered slowly over 3,000 years, while the rest of the galaxy remained unaware of their suffering. The builders had committed the perfect crime by making their victims invisible to most forms of detection. The worst part is that we know the builders are long extinct. Another dragon spoke directly into Marcus's mind. This one was smaller and more faded than the leader, but its mental voice carried bitter irony. Their obsession with perfect order eventually destroyed them when they tried to impose mathematical precision on their own chaotic biology. They died out over 1,000 years ago, but their machines continue to function exactly as designed. Marcus studied the crystal formations with new understanding. They were not just anchor points, but monuments to the builders' compulsive need for control. Even in death, they continued to torture beings whose only crime was existing in a way that offended their sense of universal order. The quantum metal shackles around each dragon were masterworks of engineering. Marcus could see how they interfaced with the creature's cellular structure at the quantum level, creating a resonance pattern that prevented dimensional phase shifts. The technology was incredibly sophisticated, but it followed logical principles that a skilled mechanic could analyze and potentially exploit. The anchor field isn't uniform, Marcus observed as he watched energy patterns flow between the crystals and shackles. It pulses and cycles like a heartbeat. There must be a central control system that coordinates all the individual anchor points. The great dragon's eyes brightened with interest. "We have observed these pulses for millennia, but never understood their significance. Your mechanical knowledge allows you to see patterns that we miss despite our intelligence." Marcus was already thinking like an engineer trying to reverse engineer an unfamiliar system. The crystal formations were obviously receivers that collected and focused the dimensional anchor field. The shackles were transmitters that projected the field directly into the dragon's quantum cellular structure. But somewhere there had to be a central processor that coordinated the entire network. "Show me the largest crystal formation in this area," Marcus requested. If the builders built this like any other control system, there should be a master node that manages all the local anchor points. Several dragons lifted into the air despite their weakened condition. and began scouting the surrounding desert. Even bound to this dimension, they could still fly, though it clearly caused them pain. Marcus watched them search the landscape, looking for the control center he was certain had to exist. Within an hour, they returned with news of a massive crystal spire located about 2 miles to the north. The formation was much larger than the others and pulsed with brighter energy patterns. More importantly, it was surrounded by a perfect circle of smaller crystals arranged in a geometric pattern that screamed artificial design. "That has to be it," Marcus said with growing excitement. "The master control node for this section of the prison grid. If I can get there and find a way to disrupt its operation, the whole local network should collapse." The great dragon moved closer, and Marcus could feel waves of hope and desperation radiating from its fading form. "But you are bound as securely as we are human, child. How can you reach the control spire when you cannot even free yourself from these simple ropes?" Marcus grinned despite their desperate situation. "Because I'm a mechanic, and mechanics don't just fix things. We also know how to break them when necessary." He began working his wrists back and forth against the ropes that held him. The rough fibers cut into his skin, but Marcus ignored the pain as he focused on finding the weak points in his bonds. Rick and the others had tied him securely, but they were not professional sailors or riggers. They had used standard knots that looked strong, but had predictable failure modes. "The key is not to fight the knots directly," Marcus explained as he worked. "You have to understand how they're constructed and find the stress points where they're most vulnerable to systematic failure." Marcus had learned this lesson years ago when working on cable systems aboard various ships. Knots and mechanical joints followed similar principles. Apply force in the wrong direction, and they got stronger. Apply it in exactly the right way, and they came apart like magic. The rope around his left wrist was beginning to loosen as Marcus found a specific angle that put maximum stress on the knot's weakest point. His mechanic's intuition guided his movements as he worked the fibers against each other in ways that the original knot design could not accommodate. "Fascinating," one of the dragons observed. "You approach the problem like water finding cracks in stone." Persistent pressure applied with perfect patience. Marcus continued working on his bonds while thinking about the larger problem of the builder control system. Even if he could free himself and reach the master crystal spire, he would need some way to disrupt its operation. The quantum technology was far beyond anything humans had developed, but all technology shared certain fundamental principles. "Tell me about the energy source that powers the anchor field," Marcus asked while still working on his ropes. "Nothing this complex can run without significant power input." The great dragon consulted with his companions before answering. "The crystals seem to draw energy directly from the planet's magnetic field and solar radiation. They are essentially living machines that convert ambient energy into the specific frequencies needed to maintain the dimensional locks." Marcus nodded as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Self-sustaining systems are efficient, but they're also vulnerable to resonance cascade failures. If you can disrupt the energy conversion process at the right frequency, the whole system can tear itself apart. The rope around his left wrist finally gave way and Marcus's hand came free. He immediately began working on the knot that held his right arm while flexing his freed fingers to restore circulation. The dragons watched with growing excitement as their potential liberator made progress toward freedom. "You truly believe you can destroy what has held us for 3 millennia?" the great dragon asked with wonder in its mental voice. "I don't know if I can," Marcus admitted as he worked on the remaining knots. "But I know I have to try. That's what humans do when faced with impossible problems. We don't calculate the odds or worry about elegant solutions. We just keep trying different approaches until something works." Marcus's right hand came free, and he immediately began working on the ropes around his ankles. The process went faster now that he had both hands available and understood how his captors had tied the knots. Within minutes, he was completely free and able to sit up for the first time since waking up in the desert. The twin suns were approaching their noon position, and the heat was becoming dangerous again despite the dragon's gift of energy. Marcus knew he had perhaps 2 hours before the temperature became lethal, even with supernatural assistance. That was barely enough time to reach the master crystal spire, let alone figure out how to destroy it. "Can any of you carry me?" Marcus asked as he struggled to his feet on legs, still weak from dehydration and heat exposure. We cannot manipulate physical matter directly while bound in this dimension, the great dragon replied sadly. But we can share more of our essence to give you strength for the journey. The risk to us is great, but without your success we will all die anyway. Marcus felt the warm, tingling sensation again as several dragons shared their life force with him. The effect was dramatic as strength flowed back into his muscles, and his mind sharpened to laser focus. But he could see that the dragons who had helped him were now barely visible and growing weaker by the moment. I won't let your sacrifice be wasted, Marcus promised as he began jogging north toward the Master Crystal Spire. Hold on just a little longer, and I'll find a way to break these chains. Marcus ran across the burning desert sand toward the massive crystal spire that rose like a frozen lightning bolt against the pale sky. The shared energy from the veiled drakes gave him strength, but he could feel it fading with each step. Behind him, the dragons followed as quickly as their weakened forms allowed, floating just above the ground like ghosts of their former glory. The heat was becoming unbearable again as the twin suns climbed toward their deadly noon position. Even with supernatural assistance, Marcus knew he had less than an hour before his human body would start shutting down from heat stroke. The crystal spire was still over a mile away and seemed to grow larger and more intimidating with each passing minute. As they got closer, Marcus could see that his guess about the master control node had been correct. The central spire was easily 100 feet tall and surrounded by 12 smaller crystals arranged in a perfect geometric circle. Energy flowed between them in visible streams of light that pulsed in complex patterns like the heartbeat of some vast machine. The quantum metal shackles around each dragon began to glow brighter as they approached the control center. The field strength was much more intense here, and Marcus could see that the creatures were suffering increased pain from the proximity to the source of their imprisonment. Several of the weaker dragons had to stop and hover at a distance, while only the strongest could continue forward. The resonance is too powerful, the great dragon said through gritted mental teeth. We cannot approach much closer without risking complete dissolution of our remaining essence. Marcus nodded and continued forward alone. As he got within a few hundred yards of the crystal spire, he began to feel strange effects from the dimensional anchor field. His vision flickered between normal sight and something that showed energy patterns flowing through the air like colored smoke. The quantum forces that held the dragons prisoner were strong enough to affect even normal matter when concentrated at this level. The master crystal itself was a work of art as much as technology. Its surface was covered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow as energy moved through its crystalline structure. Marcus could see that the entire formation was grown rather than built, with each component shaped by forces he did not understand. The builders had created their prison using principles that were as much biological as mechanical. Smaller crystals jutted from the ground around the base of the spire, like the ribs of some massive skeleton. Each one hummed with a different frequency, and Marcus realized they were individual control nodes for different aspects of the dimensional anchor system. One might control the quantum resonance patterns, while another managed power distribution or field strength calibration. Marcus walked slowly around the perimeter of the crystal formation, studying its structure with his mechanic's eye. The energy flows between components followed logical pathways that suggested a hierarchy of control systems. The Master Spire collected data from sensors throughout the region and coordinated the response of individual anchor points to maintain the prison field at optimal strength. It's like a giant quantum computer, Marcus muttered to himself as he began to understand the system's architecture. But instead of processing information, it's processing dimensional space itself. The closest Marcus could get to the central spire was about 50 feet due to the intensity of the quantum field. Any closer, and he started to feel his own cellular structure beginning to resonate in ways that were definitely not healthy. But even from this distance, he could see enough detail to begin planning his attack on the system. The control crystals around the base of the spire were the key. Each one was connected to Master Node by visible energy conduits that carried both power and control signals. If Marcus could disrupt enough of these connections, the central processor would lose its ability to coordinate the dimensional anchor field. Without coordination, the individual anchor points would begin to drift out of synchronization, and the entire local network would collapse. But the crystals were made of the same quantum metal as the dragon's shackles, and were designed to be virtually indestructible. Marcus needed a way to attack the system's function rather than its physical structure. He needed to find a weakness in the software rather than trying to break the hardware. Marcus pulled off his work belt and examined the tools he still carried. Most of them were designed for repairing quantum drive engines, but the principles were similar enough that they might be useful here. The resonance scanner could detect frequency patterns in quantum fields, while the field modulator could generate specific interference patterns. Not much to work with, but Marcus had accomplished miracles with less. He activated the resonance scanner and pointed it at the nearest control crystal. The device immediately began registering complex waveforms that represented the quantum frequencies used to maintain the dimensional locks. Marcus studied the patterns looking for irregularities or weak points that he could exploit. There, Marcus said as he spotted what he was looking for. The resonance pattern has a gap right at the 7.3 terahertz frequency. That's where the system is vulnerable to interference. Marcus adjusted his field modulator to generate a signal at exactly 7.3 terahertz and aimed it at the control crystal. The device was designed for fine-tuning quantum drive harmonics, so it did not have much power, but Marcus hoped it would be enough to disrupt the crystal's operation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The control crystal began to flicker as its internal energy patterns became unstable. The other crystals in the circle responded by increasing their own output to compensate, but this created a cascade effect that spread instability throughout the entire network. "It's working," Marcus shouted to the dragons who were watching from a safe distance. "The system is trying to autocorrect, but it can't handle the feedback loop I've created." Marcus moved to the next crystal in the circle and repeated the process. This time the disruption was even more severe as the master spire lost another control node. Warning lights began to flash within the crystalline structure, and Marcus could hear harmonics that sounded almost like alarms. The great dragon called out to him across the desert. "Human child, the field strength is beginning to fluctuate. We can feel our bonds loosening for the first time in millennia." Marcus continued working his way around the circle of control crystals, using his field modulator to inject interference patterns into each one. The quantum computer that controlled the dimensional prison was sophisticated, but it had been designed by beings who value perfection over adaptability. The builders had never considered that someone might attack their system using crude brute force methods rather than elegant counter-technology. By the time Marcus had disrupted half the control crystals, the entire system was in chaos. Energy flowed in random patterns between the remaining functional nodes, while the master spire flickered like a dying light bulb. The dimensional anchor field was collapsing, but slowly, and Marcus was running out of time as the desert heat continued to climb toward lethal levels. "I need more power," Marcus called to the dragons. "My modulator isn't strong enough to create a complete cascade failure." "We cannot approach closer without great risk," the great dragon replied. "But perhaps we can channel what remains of our essence through you to amplify your device." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, he felt a different kind of energy flowing into his body. Instead of the warm life force the dragons had shared before this was something colder and more alien. It was their connection to quantum dimensions made manifest, and it burned through his nervous system like liquid lightning. Marcus screamed as the alien energy coursed through him, but he managed to maintain his grip on the field modulator. The device began to glow with the same inner light as the dragon's eyes, and its power output increased by several orders of magnitude. When Marcus aimed it at the next control crystal, the quantum structure exploded in a shower of crystalline fragments. The cascade failure accelerated as each destroyed control crystal put more stress on the remaining nodes. Marcus worked faster now, knowing that he was racing against both time and his own body's ability to channel the dragon's quantum essence without burning out completely. His hands were shaking and his vision was starting to blur, but he forced himself to continue. Almost there, Marcus gasped as he destroyed another control crystal. Just 3 more, and the whole system should collapse. The master spire was now flashing so rapidly it looked like a strobe light. The energy patterns flowing through its structure had become completely chaotic as the quantum computer tried desperately to maintain control with fewer and fewer functional components. Warning harmonics echoed across the desert as the builder prison began its death throes. Marcus destroyed the second to last control crystal and immediately felt a change in the quantum field around him. The dimensional anchor was failing and reality itself seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. The dragons in the distance were beginning to glow brighter as their natural connection to the quantum dimensions started to reassert itself. "One more," Marcus whispered as he aimed his overloaded field modulator at the final control crystal. The device was smoking now and would probably burn out after this last shot, but it only needed to work once more. The final control crystal exploded in a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded Marcus. When his vision cleared, he saw that the master spire was dark and lifeless. The energy flows between crystals had stopped completely, and the dimensional anchor field that had imprisoned the veiled drakes for 3,000 years was finally gone. The dragons burst into brilliant light as their quantum nature reasserted itself. Marcus watched in amazement as their translucent forms became solid, and then translucent again as they flickered between dimensions. The quantum metal shackles that had bound them for so long simply phased through their bodies and fell harmlessly to the sand. Free, the great dragon sang with joy that filled Marcus's mind like sunlight. After 3 millennia of bondage, we are finally free to return to the spaces between stars. Marcus collapsed to his knees as the alien energy stopped flowing through his body. He had succeeded, but the effort had cost him dearly. His hands were burned from channeling quantum forces, and his entire nervous system felt like it had been struck by lightning. The heat of the desert was overwhelming now that he no longer had supernatural assistance. The dragon surrounded him with forms that were now blazing with recovered power and health. They had gone from dying ghosts to beings of incredible beauty and energy in a matter of minutes. Marcus had given them back their lives and their freedom, but he was not sure he would live to see them use it. "Rest, human child," the great dragon said as cool energy flowed around Marcus like a healing breeze. "You have accomplished what we thought impossible and saved our entire species from extinction. Now let us return the favor and save you from this burning wasteland." Marcus felt the cool energy flowing around him like water in a stream, and the burning pain in his body began to fade. The veiled drakes surrounded him with forms that shifted between solid matter and pure light as they celebrated their freedom from 3,000 years of imprisonment. Their joy was infectious, and Marcus found himself smiling despite his exhaustion and injuries. The great dragon lowered its magnificent head until it was level with Marcus's face. Up close, he could see that the creature's eyes held depths like looking into the heart of a nebula. Stars seemed to twinkle in those ancient orbs, and Marcus realized he was seeing the reflection of countless worlds the dragon had visited during its long life among the cosmos. "Human child, you have given us a gift beyond all measure," the dragon said with a mental voice that now rang like crystal bells instead of the pained whisper it had been before. "We are eternally in your debt, and the debt of your entire species." Marcus tried to stand, but his legs were still weak from channeling the quantum energy needed to destroy the builder control system. The dragons noticed his struggle, and more of their healing essence flowed into his body. The burns on his hands faded, and strength returned to his muscles as their power worked to repair the damage he had suffered. "I'm just glad I could help," Marcus said as he finally managed to get to his feet. "No intelligent being should be made to suffer like you did, especially not for 3,000 years. The dragons around him began to glow brighter as they tested their newly restored abilities. Several of them flickered in and out of visibility as they experimented with phasing between dimensions. Others rose into the air without effort, defying gravity through quantum manipulation of local space-time. Their joy at being able to move freely again was beautiful to witness. Marcus looked around at the destroyed crystal formation and felt a deep satisfaction at seeing the builder prison reduced to smoking rubble. The master spire had cracked from top to bottom, and the control crystals lay in fragments scattered across the desert sand. Never again would this place be used to torture innocent beings. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked the great dragon. "Where will you go?" Images flowed into Marcus's mind, showing him glimpses of the vast cosmos that awaited the freed veiled drakes. He saw nebulae where they could dance among clouds of stellar gas and binary star systems, where they could surf waves of gravitational energy. The universe was their ocean, and they were finally free to swim in it again. "We will return to the spaces between stars where we belong," the dragon replied. "There are cosmic currents to ride and stellar winds to explore. We have been cut off from the quantum realm for so long that we must relearn how to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously." Marcus nodded but felt a strange sadness at the thought of these magnificent beings leaving. In the short time he had known them, They had shown him wonders beyond imagination. The idea of returning to his mundane life as a ship mechanic seemed almost unbearable after touching something so transcendent. "But what about you, human child?" the great dragon asked, reading his thoughts as easily as before. "You cannot remain on this desert world, and your own species has betrayed you. Where will you go when we depart?" Marcus had been trying not to think about that problem. Even if he could somehow signal for rescue from this wasteland, he would still face the fact that his crewmates had tried to murder him. Captain Morrison might believe his story, but Rick and the others would claim he had abandoned the ship voluntarily. Without proof of their betrayal, Marcus would be stranded on Keth, Seven with no way off-world and no future. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I suppose I'll try to reach the mining station and hope someone there will give me passage off this planet. After that, I'll have to find another ship that needs a mechanic." The great dragon exchanged glances with his companions, and Marcus sensed they were communicating in ways he could not detect. After a moment, the dragon turned back to him with what might have been excitement in its ancient eyes. "There is another option, human child," the dragon said carefully. "We could offer you a place among us if you are willing to leave your purely human existence behind." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat at the suggestion. "What do you mean?" "We are beings of quantum energy and dimensional consciousness," the dragon explained. "Our essence exists partially outside normal space-time, which allows us to travel between stars without ships and survive in the void between galaxies. We could share that essence with you more completely than we have already done." Images flowed into Marcus's mind, showing him what such a transformation would mean. He would gain the ability to phase between dimensions and travel through space at will. His consciousness would expand to perceive reality in ways that normal humans could never imagine. He would become something more than human, while retaining the core of who he was. "But there would be no returning to your old life," the dragon warned. "Once transformed, you would be as different from baseline humanity as we are. You would be forever caught between worlds, able to visit human space, but never truly belonging there again." Marcus considered the offer carefully. His old life had never brought him much happiness anyway. He had always been an outsider among his own species, valued only for his mechanical skills, and resented for being better at his job than others. The crew of the Titan's Edge had tried to kill him, and other humans would probably treat him with similar suspicion and jealousy. "What would I do as one of you?" Marcus asked. "I'm not sure I'm wise enough or ancient enough to deserve such a gift." "You would be our bridge to the younger species," the great dragon replied. "Your mechanical intuition combined with our quantum abilities could help solve problems that neither humans nor Veil Drakes could handle alone. The universe is full of ancient machines and abandoned technologies that need someone who understands both engineering and transcendence." Marcus thought about all the broken things he had fixed during his life and all the impossible problems he had solved through stubborn determination and mechanical insight. The idea of applying those skills on a cosmic scale was incredibly appealing. He could help repair damage caused by long-dead civilizations and prevent other tragedies like what had happened to the Veil Drakes. There is also the matter of justice, another dragon added with steel in its mental voice. The Builders left other prison systems scattered throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of species may still be suffering under their control mechanisms. Someone with your unique combination of abilities could locate and destroy those prisons before more innocent beings die in bondage. That decided it for Marcus. The thought of other intelligent creatures enduring what the Veil Drakes had suffered was unbearable. If he had the power to prevent such tragedies, then he had a moral obligation to use that power regardless of the personal cost. "I accept," Marcus said without hesitation. "Show me how to become what you need me to be." The great dragon smiled in a way that lit up its entire being. "Are you certain, human child? Once begun, this transformation cannot be undone or reversed." "I'm certain," Marcus replied. "My old life is over anyway, and this gives it meaning I never had before." The dragons formed a circle around Marcus and began to sing in harmonies that existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions. The sound was indescribable, combining the music of spheres with frequencies that resonated in his bones and soul. Marcus felt a combined essence flowing into him, but this time, instead of temporary sharing, it was a permanent fusion. Pain and ecstasy warred in Marcus's nervous system as his cellular structure began to change at the quantum level. He could feel his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his physical brain to encompass multiple dimensional states simultaneously. His body became translucent and then solid again as he learned to exist in several layers of reality at once. The transformation took hours, or perhaps minutes, as time became fluid and relative. When it was complete, Marcus found himself floating several feet above the desert sand, without any effort. His body felt the same but different, as if he had gained new senses that had no names in human language. He could perceive the quantum currents flowing through space and the dimensional barriers that separated different layers of existence. "Welcome to Transcendence, human child," the great dragon said as Marcus learned to control his new abilities. "You are now Marcus Webb, the bridge builder, keeper of ancient wisdom, and liberator of the imprisoned." Marcus looked at his hands and watched them phase in and out of normal space-time as he experimented with his quantum nature. The mechanical tools on his belt had been transformed as well, becoming instruments capable of manipulating reality at the fundamental level. He was still a mechanic, but now he could repair the fabric of space itself. "Where do we start?" Marcus asked as he rose higher into the air, learning to navigate three-dimensional space through quantum manipulation. "There are distress signals calling across the galaxy," the great dragon replied. "Ancient cries for help from beings trapped by builder technology and other forms of cosmic injustice. We will follow those signals and bring freedom wherever we find suffering." The veiled drakes began to ascend toward the stars, with Marcus flying alongside them. As they left Kes 7's atmosphere behind, Marcus looked back at the desert where he had almost died and smiled. Rick and the other mechanics had tried to get rid of a problem, but instead, they had created something wonderful. The cosmos spread out before them, infinite and full of possibilities. Marcus could sense the quantum currents that would carry them between star systems and the dimensional pathways that led to realms beyond normal space. He was no longer just a human mechanic, but something far greater and more important. "Ready to begin your new life, bridge builder?" the great dragon asked as they accelerated toward faster-than-light travel. "More than ready," Marcus replied as stars began to streak past him like silver rain. "Let's go fix the universe." Together they plunged into the cosmic deep, carrying hope and liberation to all who suffered under the weight of ancient tyranny. Marcus had found his true calling at last, as both engineer and guardian to the oppressed across the galaxy.